Japanese society was based on a feudal social structure. Merchants who were on the bottom typically relied off of the resources produced by artisans and peasants to sell. Some were traveling traders or even local store owners. The artisans lived in a certain region away from samurai, as well as peasants, and produced goods for the merchants. Farmers and peasants came next and were actually superior to merchants and artisans as they produced the food that everyone was relying on. However, they were not able to eat any of the rice that they grew, and instead donated it to their daimyo or great lord, and luckily the daimyo gave some back as charity. The samurai class, next on the pyramid, had enormous power and status and served under a daimyo. Finally, there were the shoguns, the grand military generals, and the emperor, the figurehead of Japanese society. Looking at traditional Japan, housing was an important part of daily life. The houses were typically made of wood, and in their culture, shoes were to be taken off and slippers were to be put on to keep the floor clean. The Japanese used tatami mats as flooring that keeps cool during the summers and warm during the winters. Religion was also an important aspect of Japanese life. Legend goes that the emperors of Japan were descendants of the founding kami of the religion Shinto. The story has a political message that Japan should keep the size of its country, and its survival depends on maintaining the relationship between the emperor and the people. The people of Japan believed that they must be proud and loyal enough to fight for their country.
When the U.S. naval fleet first appeared on Japanese shores in 1853, the Japanese were forced to open its ports for trade with Americans. It was a huge shock to all of Japan how advanced the technology was, especially in shipbuilding and weaponry. The current government at that time, the Tokugawa shogunate, was opposed to opening up ports but was later overthrown. As a result, the Meiji government took over. The Japanese government wanted to think of the Americans as equals, so they urged citizens to adopt Western culture and morale. Like Western imperialism, Japanese expansion was fueled with social Darwinism and racism. It needed to protect itself from outside opposition, so Japan sided with Western countries. However, because they were still Asian, the Japanese were treated the same way as other Asian countries. Their growing sense of nationalism contributed to the rising tension between Japan and outside countries to make peace with each other. Japan didn't want to be imperialized, yet at the same time they tried to imperialize other countries. They also didn't want to end up like China, split into several parts, ruled by other nations. Power was based on monarchy, so it would benefit the whole country, rather than feudalism, its previous form of government. Officials were sent to Europe and America to learn new ways to strengthen government and politics. In this way, Japanese imperialism didn't really differ from European imperialism. Expansion was turned into a systematic goal for security, national pride, resources, settlement, and marketing.
Japan prospered a lot under the Meiji era, which started in 1868 and eventually ended in 1912. The island of Hokkaido was explored and expansion into China was undertaken. This was for many different reasons. Since Hokkaido was an island, the soil near the ocean was very fertile and rich. However, during the Meiji era, new Western ideas were being adopted and samurai were stripped of all their rights as the entire class was completely wiped out due to the remodeling of a new form of government. Japan was aimed towards a democracy in which people were equal as they ended their isolation to try to industrialize. Powerful family businesses, called zaibatsu, even caused a financial crisis during the mid-1880s, but was soon restored with the new currency system and the establishment of the Bank of Japan. During industrialization, workers were treated poorly and socialist and liberal movements were even shut down by the government. Japan then received its first parliamentary-styled government, where the emperor kept sovereignty, where conflicts of interest in Korea quickly began. Japan was extremely motivated and ready to imperialize China. First of all, they believed that they were superior to all and that God himself favored the Japanese land, rather than the neighboring lands of the Chinese, which was crippled, and the Korean, who did not have a superior monarchy. In addition, they were at an advantage point, being an island nation and also being close to ideal countries of imperialism, including China, Korea, and Vietnam. In the military aspect, the Japanese were superior as the neighboring power was shut down and unable to do anything. From an economic viewpoint, the Japanese were extremely low on natural resources and could use future colonies to obtain these raw materials to export as manufactured goods, especially in the textile industry. China broke an agreement in 1894 that they would not send their military forces into Korea if Japan would not do so as well. However, China raided Korea, but it was quickly fought back by the Japan, who sent their troops to Korea and pushed the Chinese out during the major event of the Sino-Japanese War. China's navy was destroyed and the Japanese military gained an outpost in Manchuria. Eventually, the Chinese signed a peace treaty with Japan in 1895, making Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands Japan's first colonies.
Japan soon became power-hungry with their new colonies and resources that they were getting. The strong military and government that the Japanese had built during this time they colonized and modernized made a new world. The Second Sino-Japanese War is an example of how the Japanese became obsessed with war and gaining territory. In 1937, Japanese soldiers used bombs as an excuse to invade the Chinese state of Manchuria yet again, which later became conquered as Japanese territory named as Manchukuo. They later destroyed the city of Shanghai and the city of Nanking. China still fought back, however, and the war became a stalemate in 1939. This wouldn't stop Japan's war-hungry military. When America and Britain enacted an oil embargo, Japan saw this as an opportunity to engage in an ambush. In 1941, the Pearl Harbor bombing occurred, plunging Japan and America into World War II. Over the first 6 months, Japan expanded their territory and also invaded many Pacific islands in the Pacific War. The turning point in this war was the Battle of Midway. After that battle, the Allied forces slowly won back colonies. America used air raids and also invaded Okinawa. In 1945, they proposed the Potsdam Declaration, which would end the war, but Japan did not compromise. After the 2 atomic bombs were dropped, the Japanese finally surrendered. Their surrender cost them their colonies and the war. To help them revive their economy and their damaged country, General MacArthur helped lead the occupation and reconstruction of Japan. This plan had 3 phases to it, 3 periods: reform and punishment, rebuilding economy, and peace treaty and alliance. The first period was from 1945 to 1947, when the Japan was punished for their crimes in the war. MacArthur also made it so that previous veterans of World War II could no longer participate in the Japanese government. This would prevent Japan's power from being in the hands of the wrong people. Economically, MacArthur introduced a land reform which would help the farmers. He also helped them by breaking up big conglomerates in Japan. During this period, a new constitution was also drafted. It gave a more parliamentary power to the government and reduced the power of the emperor. This new document gave more rights to women and made it harder for war to be declared. The second phase of the Reconstruction was from 1947 to 1948, when economic crisis broke out and the Allied powers were afraid that this would cause Japan to become communist. Because of this period was also known as the reverse course. Japan needed raw materials in order to produce goods and rebuild their economy. The Korean War was the event that helped them with their economic problems. It allowed them to trade supplies with America, which helped it restore its economy. The third stage was to establish peace between Japan after it became self-sufficient. In 1951, 52 nations met in San Francisco and ultimately signed the Treaty of Peace. Even today, China and Japan still have mutual enmity for each other, originating from the Chinese defeat in the Sino-Japanese War, when the country was still under Japanese imperialist occupation. Recently, in 2005, there was a series of anti-Japanese demonstrations regarding a new nationalist school textbook, as well as Japan's permanent seat in the UN Security Council, which was denied. In addition, in 2012, thousands of Chinese protesters resisted imperialist movements made by Japan in order to gain disputed land. The issue was over uninhabited islands located between Japan and China. Rioters hurled bottles and eggs outside the Japanese embassy. Many held Chinese flags and portraits of the late Chinese chairman. Younger protesters yelled, "Down with Japanese imperialism," and called for war as they marched through streets. The media helped spread such images all throughout China. Chinese social media sites even showed pictures of mobs burning and ransacking Japanese-branded items in stores. The animosity between these two countries runs deep, particularly because of imperialism itself. After China gained independence, it struggled to reconstruct itself as the majority of its country was still split into different cultures. Japan evolved from a small, isolated island country into a modern world power. Though it had its own culture, social, and government system, Western powers soon converted and influenced Japan to modernize. These events plunged Japan to its imperial state, where the Japanese became too powerful and disrupted the peace of the world. After they lost World War II, Japan reformed. Japan was no longer powerful enough to start another world war, but became a peaceful, self-sufficient country. This is the story of Imperial Japan.